Hi everyone, it's Tim from Aussie Expat Home Loans and welcome to this month's Property Pulse. This month I'm down in Melbourne, sitting with Hamish McIntosh from Whitehaven Property Group, where we're breaking down the Melbourne property market. Is it the place to keep your eye on for the next 12 months? Hamish, good to be with you again. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you reshooting this with me as well, given I did post about this on LinkedIn. We did shoot another video when I was here last time in sunny Melbourne. Unfortunately, my video recording skills are not as good as I thought they were.
No, it's completely fine. Thank you for having me again. It's actually been a fair bit happened since that time we catch up. So it's not a bad time to reshoot and
definitely
have a good discussion today.
It's been, the market's changed very quickly in the last couple of months. Last time we caught up, I felt like there's a bit more pessimism in the market in Melbourne, but especially being here again and just seeing what some of the indicators look like, I really feel like going into the new year, it's going to be a good story to tell.
Absolutely. It's been, I guess as a business, we always base it on inquiry and people's interest out in the marketplace when they come to us. If I told anyone about Melbourne 6 months ago, people would just quickly go the other way. And obviously that's because I've heard so much negative sentiment out in the marketplace. But the last couple of months, we've actually got clients coming to us wanting to know more about Melbourne. Like they see the opportunity and evaluate at the moment, which obviously shows there must be some more positive chat happening out in the marketplace that the people want to potentially make some decisions to buy back into Victoria, which I think can be a pretty wise decision at the moment given the value and the opportunities here, which we're seeing.
I think the piece around value is a big one because Melbourne was the second highest median house price in the country, and over the last 12 months it's fallen to number 6 now, which is a huge drop. It's it's now cheaper to buy here than it is in Perth, in Adelaide, in Brisbane, in Canberra. It's not a place that Melbourne's ever been before, but you've still got a city that has really strong rental growth. It's still a city that has the highest amount of new arrivals coming in from the immigration intake that Australia has. So I really think that value piece is where Melbourne is probably best positioned going into 2025.
Absolutely, because I'm sure we'll cover it off a bit later on, but look, at Melbourne's going to grow, or Victoria's going to grow substantially with population, and Melbourne's going to be the most populated city in Australia, is the estimates. Grow from 5 million to 8 million people. So that's a lot of population intake to come to our country, come to our state, I should say, with where the values currently lie in the property market. So I think there's definitely value out here. There's strong demand coming in. All the key indicators to say that if you buy an investment, it should perform over time. So it's an interesting space. Of course, people have questions and there's some negative sentiment still out there, but I'm definitely seeing some more positive signs.
It'd be good to maybe recap for some of our viewers, what were some of the changes in the last 12 months that caused Melbourne's prices to kind of do what they've done compared to other cities?
Oh, look, there's been some key ones, but the main one, obviously, for anyone out there listening, has been the land tax ruling in Victoria. It really has been a big killer for us with that change coming in. So obviously, people listening would be aware that we went through probably the biggest issue with COVID. We were the most impacted over time. So there was a lot of positives into the market in terms of grants to get our economy moving and our market moving. But unfortunately, when we bring those grants in, we as a state have to pay back that debt. And one of the main ways at the moment the government's seeing that was through land tax and changing the ruling in that space. So the ruling obviously was the first $300,000 in Victoria for your investment land pretty much used to be free.
Yes.
And you start getting charged on top of that. That amount's now come down to $50,000. Yes. So you can imagine everyone's land tax bills have gone up substantially.
Even my little apartment in South Yarra got a land tax bill this year. So
a good example for everyone out there listening would be my property in Geelong that I own. I'll just put on that property. My land tax bill was always around $600-700 on a decent amount of land down there. I just got my land tax bill this year was $2,300.
Okay, so it's a pretty big increase.
Yeah, it was a decent increase on that in regards to where it was sitting. So if that's just for me personally on one property, you can imagine how much other people out there are impacting if they own multiple properties in Victoria. You own really expensive properties, a lot of land, your land tax bill's gone up by tens of thousands of dollars. And with the market not moving, in a growth perspective, you'd be weighing up going, why do I keep putting this money into this investment when I'm essentially not making any money? It's just burning cash in my pocket.
Yes.
And unfortunately, that's been the reason why Melbourne's market has seen a bit of a bottom out recently.
Is it really, like a lot of the changes have really been around investors, right? But for homeowners, there really hasn't been any major tax changes in the last 12 months.
No, not through Melbourne. So the biggest issue, as I said, for clarity, that's all through investment. So the investors have been impacted in that space, definitely. Own occupiers, obviously, as most governments in most states, they try and favour their policies to get owner-occupiers into the market. Queensland had some incentives recently with a building grant and government grant that came in. South Australia increased their first home buyer threshold. So they're doing positive things in the marketplace, whereas Victoria, we've been doing some negative sentiment just to essentially help pay back our debt. And it's been impacting the investors more than the owner-occupiers.
Definitely. Do you think over the kind of medium term, obviously investors, it's more expensive to invest in property in Melbourne, but for homeowners it's getting cheaper and cheaper. Do you think there'll be an influx of first home buyers or more homeowners next year? And do you think that'll have any impact on the rental stock in Melbourne?
I think there'll definitely be more influx of buyers coming through just because of the value add. I even think with first home buyers and owner-occupiers as well as investors, I think people will see the value add here at some point when you start comparing what you can get for your money here compared to, say, Queensland and Adelaide. That's how I base this on any decision I make for a client or for myself. Where does 700 grand take you in Melbourne compared to Brisbane or Adelaide? And eventually there's a tipping point where you convert your mindset to go, there's probably better opportunities elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that those discussions are very relevant around Melbourne at the moment. I think the big ticket item will obviously be rates, because at the moment rates, all the talk is we're going to start to come down at some point by next year. So if we do drop by 0.5 or 1% by the end of next year, all of a sudden that extra land tax you're paying doesn't seem as bad because now you're saving it back on the rate cut. So I think that'll be a really ultimate kicker for our market to get it moving again. The owner-occupiers will always be there. There is really strong sentiment still in the Melbourne market for that good price point owner-occupier stock of 700 grand to $1 million. A lot of the time that still does move relatively quickly.
I keep seeing articles in The Age with property prices reaching record levels, or for some homes in Melbourne.
So those areas still move. It's the high price point stuff that's been obviously big impacted because not a lot of people have access to that money. If investors were looking to buy those properties as well, they've got to weigh up the land tax issue now. So it's definitely an interesting time. I think stock will be an issue wherever we go around Australia, because at some point they'll come back to Victoria to invest, and we still really haven't solved our housing shortage, our supply issues out. And when rates drop, more buyers come into the market, yet we're still in a very, very undersupplied market, both nationally and both locally and here in Melbourne. So there's only so much stock to go, and when the rains are released, they all come to buy. Eventually the stock will run dry again, and we'll be in the same issue we are in Queensland and Adelaide at the moment with a low amount of supply.
I think it's the question I get asked the most with clients, or even new clients that we're talking to. People are wanting to get in, but they're kind of also waiting for the rate cuts to come next year. But my sentiment's always been, I think it was Warren Buffett that said, when people are fearful, you should be greedy. When people are greedy, you should be fearful. And so I keep telling people, if you wait until next year, you're also in a pool of people that are all waiting at the same time as you. And things, I've been doing this a long time, been lending money for almost 20 years. Everything goes in a cycle, always. And as long as there's immigration intake into Australia, and especially in Melbourne, as long as there's people moving here, the market will never crash. It's not going to correct 20, 40% like all those doomsayers like to say.
Well, I write a nickel for every time a client says, I'm waiting for the market to drop, I'm waiting for the market to crash. They're doing this for a decade, investing for 20 years. It's never gone to the complete crash. Of course, we've dropped back at stages, but eventually it responds and bounces back. And you think of the key moments in history in the last 40 years or 50 years. We've had some big moments in life, and no different to some stuff we're going through now. But eventually it's turned, it's responded, we've got back where we need to be, and the market's performed. Your point around investing now before the rate cut, absolutely. It's the prime time to do it. You can still get a decent bargain and a decent deal while that's happening. Obviously, when the wheels turn again and the rates drop, you're fighting with so many other people in the market to buy, but then naturally you'll start to pay a little bit more overs on the price point of the property because there's more demand to buy. So it's all about timing to get into the market, because you want to be in the market when the boom happens. That's obviously where you're going to make the most amount of money.
And I think I mentioned it before, but the rental vacancy rate is still very low in Melbourne. It's around like 1.2%, I think, for the last month, which means, yes, there's a lot of people selling their investment properties at the moment, but for anyone that's buying, there's still plenty of tenants around to rent them, and you can still make some pretty good returns as well.
Absolutely. So I think the rental crisis is here to stay. There's a shortage of stock around that's making it interesting. Again, Melbourne, the supply is quite low. Interstate, I know I've touched on a little bit, incredibly low. It's difficult to get a rental, really depending where you buy, obviously at the moment. So again, my fear at the moment is the supply level isn't really where it needs to be. And the government have got all these announcements and these policies. They're trying to help with this, with the 1.2 million new homes over the next 5 years. I don't think we're on target at the moment from the data I can see and obviously we've still got record migration coming, population, keep making babies. That issue there doesn't seem to be solved for me in regards to what I can see in terms of the data. And when rates drop, it's more support demand coming to the market.
Yes.
For me, it only means one thing: more stress on the rental market, more stress on the buyer market.
Yeah. And surprisingly, units in Melbourne have done pretty well actually over the last kind of 6-9 months, mainly for that reason that more homeowners can get in, it's a lower price point, and also for investors that the yields are really strong too.
Absolutely, it's been one of our best performers in Melbourne over the last period of time, because it did drop back so much through COVID, obviously, so it's responding and bouncing back. I guess for me, everyone has got an opinion on apartments, or a townhouse versus land. There's always an appeal for every type of property, in my opinion, and it'll serve its purpose over time. An interesting discussion around apartments, as an example at the moment, is where can you afford at 600 grand, as an example, within an 8 to 10k radius of a city, of a capital city. If you want to live it and be a young generation and live within a CBD, and you want to own your own property and you don't want to go rent best, what are your options? Like, it's going to be a point in time where it's only going to be an apartment you can afford. So either you take the apartment, or then you go live further out of town, which a lot of people don't want to do, especially the younger generation. So you've got to weigh up those decisions at the moment. That's where apartments and townhouses all have their runs and cycles over time for people to be able to make some money.
Yeah. I have a lot of clients that are always hesitant to buy apartments, but and mainly because there's been a lot of news in the last, I guess 5 years, especially around cladding issues, building issues. If someone is going to look to buy an apartment, what are some of the things you recommend they check before they purchase?
Well, definitely the developer and builder background to start with. You get an idea of if the project's out of the ground, construction timeframes, where that's all sitting. That's obviously number one. Obviously, with off the plan, any purchase you make, you want to make sure that whether it's a house to land or a townhouse site, have we got clarity around when we think this project's going to be completed, how the developer's funded, how they're financed, all critical stuff like that to make sure we're not waiting 3, 4, 5 years for your property to come to life. There are some design things to look for as well when you buy apartments. You want to make sure your floor plan's correct, good square floor plans, natural light. Some benefits like this. Amenity in buildings is really important these days because people are choosing lifestyle. So what does the building come with? But obviously the flow and effect of that is make sure the sink, the body corp and these things aren't astronomical, because obviously over time they'll continue to go up. So there's interesting factors. I find apartments definitely in Melbourne, some locations, every apartment project we see come forward now, I felt they're trying to outdo the previous one. The amount of amenity I see in these buildings these days is astronomical. It's amazing, some of these projects you walk through. Yeah. So they're the key things I'll be looking to do when you're buying into those areas. You want to go, if you're buying for an investment point of view, obviously price point's critical. Obviously you want to be in a good area where you get a decent yield, because naturally again, apartments aren't your best growth asset over time. So you want to make sure your yield stacks up in regards to supporting that asset as you own it.
Definitely. I think also, especially when I was looking to buy mine last year, the best thing you can do is try and get as many records of the Owners Court meetings for the last kind of 5-10 years as well, because you really want to look at, has the building had any issues, especially around cladding, and if they have, has it already been rectified? Because the last thing you want is to buy and then something comes up or you get hit with a nasty bill in 6 months.
A good example of that is I was building and then so we had to move out and get a rental. And so obviously being a renter, I didn't know what's happening with the building. And I moved out, and a month later, all this scaffolding was going up around the building. And I said, what's going on here? And they're fixing all the cladding on the building. 5 months I had all this around my building in regards to this, and I was just a renter while we're building, so I had no idea that but obviously there was own occupiers in that building. So that's happening quite regularly around Melbourne, and that would be a decent cost for the people that own that building, because the building's quite old. So their body corp and their expenses to do this would be quite expensive. So it's a really relevant point you made to make sure you really check that. The body corp's the critical one, as we know, because if it's going up thousands of dollars each year, it's really digging into your holding costs, your feasibility, all these things to actually run that investment.
Definitely. I guess looking ahead, where do you see other main opportunities in Melbourne at the moment?
For us
going into next year.
So we've been doing a lot of work really on the middle tier of Melbourne, so around that western corridor, northern corridor. Open and honest, I love the Preston and Heidelberg and that sort of pocket through there. Reservoir seems like a really undervalued pocket given how its proximity to the city. The western corridor is our fastest growing corridor nearly in Melbourne, so the Werribee region and Wyndham Vale, it's going to grow from 250,000 people to 500,000 people in the next period of time. So that's a big growth area happening. You look at key infrastructure projects, it's a good thing to follow, or a good reason to follow with property investment, see where the government's spending money. Right, because it's a good follower that they're actually trying to house our population, and we need infrastructure and health precincts and education precincts to support it. We've got the Westgate Tunnel getting built. Obviously, a few hospital upgrades, and there's a new hospital getting built out at Cobblebank. So those signs to me show the government are planning for our population to head there, and that's usually a good sign of how to make money off property investment. I don't mind a couple of areas too in the southeastern corridor as well, but in the end, your budget will be critical. There's just decent value everywhere I see in Melbourne at the moment, so I see the market really turning. I see it already with inquiry. There's no doubt people are starting to get wind of the value now in the Melbourne market, especially with rates dropping. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 6 months.
Definitely. I know as a business, like obviously you're based in Melbourne and we're talking about Melbourne, but as a business, you don't just focus on Melbourne as well. So how are the other states comparing to, and maybe how they're compared to 6 months ago, and what kind of buying ethos do you have now versus earlier?
Yeah, look, there's no, I think interstate still has a decent run to go in some of these markets because people, one, a little bit still frowned upon in Melbourne, just won't put their money here. Naturally, the rent and returns are a little bit stronger in those interstate markets compared to locally, but you look at the rolling average in the last 12 months in those main states, Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth, Perth circa 24-25% still on a rolling average.
Yeah.
Adelaide and Brisbane are hovering between 14 to 15% as a rolling average. So they're obviously still performing really strongly. There's a lot of demand. There's some key factors for that interstate at the moment because literally there's just no supply. Right? In land in Adelaide and land in Queensland is incredibly difficult to get, which obviously then drives up pricing really quickly. And obviously locally here in Melbourne, I see the opportunity now, the fact that price point is becoming more cheap and affordable than Adelaide, than Brisbane. And that's when I start to look at it and go, where's the tipping point here where people are starting to make a decision to come back to Melbourne? Do you buy into a city where it's 3 million people over the next 25 years compared to, say, Adelaide growing by 400,000 or 500,000 people? These are the arguments and decisions that people will weigh up. And obviously we'll put our advice in front of them where we think the best opportunities lie. Yeah,
for sure. Thanks for your time, Hamish. It's always really great to chat to you and some really good pieces of information in there.
No worries at all. Thank you very much.
If anyone wants to find Hamish, we'll have his details under the video, as always.
Thank you, mate. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you.